recognize that information could be misused unless you had been properly trained how to handle it. My reading tells me that the young Europeans who went to Egypt couldn't stay for the full course. I've read that it took 40 years to become a master in Kemet. That seems like a long time until you realize it takes about 40 years here to get a PhD. About the same thing. And they started normally with learning to control the body. Why the body?
Body is like a small scale universe.
And the body is the hardest thing to control. Let me carry it to a story you've heard before in the Bible. Jesus in the wilderness. The character of Jesus in the wilderness, he's been fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. Satan comes to him. Apparently they're good friends. And Satan says, you hungry. Why don't you turn one of these rocks into bread so you can eat? You out here starving. Turn a rock to bread. The first challenge to the character of Jesus in the Bible is at the level of the body. The text says, Jesus responds, for it is written, man does not live by bread alone. With most of us, the first level of attack that comes on us is at the level of the body. Some of y'all here been in trouble because of the body. Okay. I won't look at nobody in particular. If you can get past the body, the next challenge comes to the level of the mind. The text says, Satan carries Jesus up to a high mountain and says, look, it's written that if you slip off this rock, his angels will grab you before you hit the ground. Why don't you go and jump on off and see if angels grab you? Jesus says, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. In other words, I don't have to go through no test to try to prove to you who I am. I know who I am, according to the story. That's an attack at the level of the mind. The text goes on and says, then Satan carries Jesus up to the highest mountain where he can survey all the kingdoms of the world. And Satan says to him, look, all this stuff belongs to me. I give it to you. If you just bow down and worship me. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Get out of my face. That's the ghetto translation. Get out of my face. Get to stepping. That was a bribe. Do this, I'll give you that. A bribe is never about the money. It's always about the morality. That was an attack on the spirit. Body, mind, spirit. Those are the three levels of a human being. So that the attack on hunger, the body, is the first level of attack where most people are most vulnerable. So they started first with the body. If you control your body, then you have the peace of mind, you have the ability then to move on and try to control your mind. Only after you've dealt with your body and your mind can you start to work with your spirit. My reading tells me most of the young Europeans who went to Egypt to study couldn't stay a long time. The average lifespan back in Europe was only about 40, 45 years at that time. Couldn't take 40 years and stay in Egypt. Go back home so you could spread some information you gotten. So for the most part, they never got to the third level of study. Never got to spirit. So what then happens in European psychology? There is no spirit. If you read European psychology, they have what they call the mind-body conflict. mind, body. Ain't no spirit involved. The body wants to do one thing, the mind wants to do the other. You've seen that time and time again and did not know what you were looking at. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. One represents the body, other one represents the mind. And what happens in all those cases, Wolfman. You know, all these folks who are tormented, if the moon turned the wrong way, it's going to turn you back to your animal self. And you no longer have any mental ability over your body. Bodies do whatever the hell they want to do. Okay? You've seen that before, but didn't recognize that that comes out of European psychology. It's the absence of spirit. In African psychology, that's not a problem because the spirit integrates the mind with the body. But Europeans never got to that part of the course. They try to focus on the mind, and as far as they're concerned, the body is bad because that's the part that's always trying to drive them off of the mark, always fighting with the mind. Mind will do one thing, body will do the other. You've seen that again in the cartoons. Angels on one shoulder, devil on the other shoulder. Both of them shouting directions to the poor man, man confused, can't make no decisions, you know, because there's no spirit involved. Again, these concepts come deeply out of Egyptian cosmology. A lot of times we don't recognize what we're seeing because we don't know where it came from and don't have the proper interpretation of it. You know, I used to get bothered by the fact that Europeans came to Africa and it looked like to me, Africans just laid down and gave them Africa. Till I recognized that they had superior weapons. Well, that bothered me too, you know, because, you know, I sort of thought that, you know, maybe you're smart, you make better weapons. But then I thought about the other part was that if you're not fighting all the time, you don't need weapons. The reasons Europeans developed more sophisticated weapons, because they was fighting all the time. Okay? If you lived in a culture where fighting was not important, you didn't need to be making more and more sophisticated weapons. So that even here, we have to go behind the things we see to try to figure out why they happen the way they did, or just the surface information will cause us, again, to denigrate our people and figure out that they weren't too sophisticated, they weren't too smart, just didn't know what they was doing, that they were living a different lifestyle. You know, I remember Alex Haley's Kunta Kinte roots. When Kunta Kinte strays away from his matriculation class, from his manhood sessions, and goes down on the beach and sees the white folks, runs back and tells the Baba. And the head Baba says, well, things will never be the same again. So I know what them pale people you saw down there. Things will never be the same again, you know, because they have a different lifestyle. And it's not something that we're equipped right now to deal with. Egypt is critical to understanding of Africa and African culture for several important reasons. I'm trying to reinforce that point, among which the following. Kemet has become the translation media for Europeanized African Americans. And I'm showing you there the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was a stone found in Egypt that had 3 different kinds of script on it. Hieroglyphics, demonic, which was a more current everyday script, and then I think an old, I want to say Latin or Greek, but it was one of the transitional languages. When the Rosetta Stone was found, for the first time, having the same passage written in 3 different languages enabled people to begin to understand for the first time what the hieroglyphic symbols meant. And that opened the door to translating the stuff that they saw on the walls. I use that as an example of a translation medium. The Rosetta Stone became a translation medium. For us, we're all Europeanized African Americans. For us, Egypt becomes a translation medium. Because without Egypt, we'd have almost no way of understanding the rest of Africa. I sang in a choir for a number of years. I remember when we sang this particular piece by Schoenberg. It was written in 12 tones. Most of us relate to an 8-tone system. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, 8 tones. Schoenberg wrote a 12-tone system. It was very, very difficult to sing. The piece was called Friede auf der Erde. It was 40 pages long. And they gave us the pitch to begin on, and you had to work very, very hard through the entire piece because the accompaniment did not help you at all, and you're singing a 12-tone piece. It was not until the last page that the chords finally resolved into something that sounded familiar. And I can't tell you how joyous I was when we got to page 40. And the whole thing resolved, and I knew I'd been right the whole time. Walking in the dark, up a third, down a third, up a fifth, down a quarter. You're trying to make sure I had the intervals correct to get there. I found that very difficult to sing. That was modern music as far as I was concerned. Schoenberg. Remember the first time I heard Stravinsky's Le Sac de Printemps, The Rites of Spring. Firebird, you've probably seen Alvin Ailey's company dance that. I'm told that when that was first performed in the Paris Opera House, the folks tried to burn the place down. They were so upset by how different it sounded. My point is this: European music has just become abstract in the last less than 100 years. Before that, everything was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I remember the first time I tried to sing in the choir what they call twos against threes. Dot, 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 syncopated rhythms was difficult because I only learned 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here's the point. African music was polyphonic, many tones, and polyrhythmic 10,000 years ago. One of the reasons I did not enjoy African music was I couldn't relate to it. It was too complex. Many of you, when you hear African music, you can't find a hook for it because your mind's just thinking very simplistically, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So now, because of Egypt showing me the complexity of Africa, I can now recognize that it's not my inability to understand it, it's the folks who've trained me didn't understand it. So now, once again, I've got to go off on my own and train myself to understand polyrhythmic, polyphonic music. I remember the first time I saw modern art, Picasso. It was different because until 100 years ago, European art was purely representational. Bowl of fruit, 3 oranges, an apple, and a peach. You've seen that. It was a major advance when they started painting people. Now Picasso comes up with all these abstract shapes, which, by the way, I've now found out that he had a whole series which is copies of African masks. They got it down at Smithsonian, got a display down there where they show the African mask and the Picasso copy. Here's the point. African art was abstract 10,000 years ago. Without Egypt, I'd have no mechanism to understand that. Ballet is standard European dance. Everything prescribed, very stilted, very staid. I remember the first time I saw Alvin Ailey Dance Company, I was blown away because it was interpretive. If you go back and read, you'll find out that modern dance in this country was pioneered by Martha Graham. in New York City. 2 semesters after she taught at Spelman. Well, she probably saw the stuff that she took to New York. Once again, European dance has just become modern in the last 100 years. African dance has been abstract for 10,000 years. So Kemet becomes very important to us, Europeanized African Americans, because it provides a bridge to go back and to begin to sense an understanding of what our people understood. And we'd have no mechanism for going back, in most cases, without Egypt. Now, I felt bad initially because I looked at the folks in Egypt and it didn't look like me. I couldn't connect with them. But then I came to realize, when I saw that stela of the Nubians and the Egyptians, that the folks who are there now, the experts who have custody of the artifacts, the people I see on television talking about the stuff, they're Arabs. They're not Nubians. They came to that area just like the Germans came to Milwaukee. They're not original to that area. So that, once again, we've got to get past that and go back and connect with our people directly. I belong to a fraternity. Black fraternities in this country started as a result of white fraternities. White fraternities were copies of European fraternities. European fraternities were copies of Masonic orders. Masonic orders were copies of the Egyptian mystery schools. So now that I know that, I can go on back home. And by the way, why they call them mystery schools? Think about this. That's right. If the folks in Kemet operated the school, obviously it wasn't no mystery to them. Terminology again, mystery schools, mystery system. All that tells me they don't understand it yet. Who that does that? Lefkowitz. Oh, Mary Lefkowitz, yeah. Well, she would. The point I'm trying to make is that Egypt becomes for us a most valuable resource. Virtually everything that was conceptualized in Africa was codified in stone in Egypt. And we can go back now and go back home through Egypt. Okay, these are drawings from the European era of what's called the trivium, 3 courses of study: grammar, rhetoric, and logic. That's what the Greeks studied, the trivium. Grammar 3, grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The Romans added to that the quadrennium, which consisted of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those 7 things together in European philosophy are called the 7 liberal arts. That whole course of study comes out of Kemet. The Greeks had the trivium, T-R-I-V-I-U-M, trivium, consisting of grammar, rhetoric, and logic. The Romans added to that the quadrennium, Q-U-A-D-R-I-V-I-U-M, consisting of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And obviously all 7 of them come out of Kemet, because they have all 7. Now, we move to Christianity and religion. We have a treasure trove of stuff that comes out of Kemet. I was told when I was coming up that the Jews had invented monotheism. I know nothing about Akhenaten. In truth, in Africa, they always had the sense to realize that there was one great God.